Welcome, everybody, from the North American Climate Justice Team, which is sponsored by the Greater Pacific Northwest Mission Center. Thank you all for attending. It was good to see a lot of familiar faces and old friends on the screen. Thank you. Many of us, although perhaps not all of us, are part of the Community of Christ, a church that has joined a lot of other organizations in declaring a climate emergency. We're following that emergency in the news, experiencing the reality of the deepening crises of fires, storms, and droughts. Change is accelerating, and the time to act is getting shorter. We're approaching irreversible tipping points, aware that the situation has become more urgent. So we'll be talking more about tipping points in our November webinar. Our last season of webinars focused on the restoration of right relationships. It built on our heritage of restoration, exploring responsible relationships with the earth and its creatures, land, sea, and air. For the coming fall and winter series of climate webinars, we'll be going deeper into the concept of restoring right relationships, focusing more on equity issues among human populations and natural biomes. Our new theme will be prophetic courage for a just transition. Too often, the perception of the transition to green energy assumes that some people will be left behind, including those whose current livelihoods depend on fossil fuels, like farmers and truckers. A just transition refers to the vision of justice, equity, and inclusion of the marginalized as we decrease fossil fuel use and implement climate solutions. It does indeed take prophetic courage to create just transitions, rather than just hurried solutions that benefit only the wealthy. Here to talk with us today about prophetic courage is Stacy Cram of Community of Christ. Stacy is currently a member of the First Presidency and counselor to Steve Veazey, who's retiring as our prophet president. Through a church-wide discernment process, she has now been designated by the Council of 12 Apostles as the prophet designate. If sustained at the 2025 World Conference of Community of Christ, she will become the prophet president of the church. Stacy's expertise in finance, engineering, organization, and systems management, that is, provides an excellent foundation for leading the church into the future. Her years of experience as an apostle, the first woman presiding bishop, and part of the First Presidency has prepared her for handling issues of policy, procedure, and personnel through a variety of changing circumstances. She has a Master's of Religion degree and a PhD in engineering and management. And her spiritual depth and visionary outlook will be greatly needed as prophet in a world of challenges, changes, and increased secularism. In addition, Stacy is a personable, positive, and approachable human being. I can testify to that. I worked with her for many years. Stacy and her husband, Stephen, currently live a tale of two cities. They have a home in Boston, Massachusetts, across the street from their three grandbabies, and a home near the temple in Independence, Missouri. And since she lost power today in her home, we're very fortunate that she lives close to the temple and was able to get to the temple to be with us today. Stephen is semi-retired, but stays busy providing engineering consulting to various organizations. Stacy and Stephen have a vibrant interest in what is happening in the world and being actively involved in just, positive change. Becoming grandparents, of course, has underscored their passion for creation and our need to be faithful stewards of the earth. We're fortunate to be able to host Stacy today as our guest presenter, sharing with us on the topic At the Crossroads, Igniting Faith and Justice in a Time of Change. Stacy, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Susan. Susan and I have walked many journeys together, and it is nice to be online with her today. We went into the Council of 12 at the same time. And it's
Great.
an honor to be with all of you as I'm looking through the names and the little squares. I recognize a lot of people that I've had the opportunity to share with. And so I'm grateful for the technology that brings us together this way. I also find it a privilege to be able to kick off this webinar season. The team from the Greater Pacific Northwest has been a blessing to the church in numerous ways through their resources, their webinars, the website that they manage, the work that they do. They keep us informed, guided, and challenged in our role of healing and protecting the world for the sake of not only ourselves, but future generations. And so it's an honor to be able to help this series get started. I want to thank each one of you because I know that on Sunday afternoons or Sunday evenings or Monday mornings, depending on where you are, that there are a lot of things that you could be doing with your time. And so it speaks volumes to your own commitment and interest in protecting and healing the earth that you are choosing to be present here. I want to honor and respect your choice and do the very best I can to provide you a good return on your investment of time. Through this webinar, as Susan said, we're kicking off the annual series, which is focused on prophetic courage for a just transition. In my thoughts, we will unpack what this annual theme means and explore how the choices we make today will shape our collective future. I want to caveat that I am not an environmental or climate scientist. And as I look at some of the names that are participating today, I know that many of you have a lot more information on some of the particular facts and circumstances and situations that we face and some of the best pathways forward. And so I'm grateful that you are all here, and I am grateful that future webinars will be bringing some of those details for this group's consideration. Like those of you who are maybe not experts, I try to seek out well-researched ideas about what is happening in our world and then how we can best respond. I am dependent on the work and expertise of others in seeking practical solutions. In recent years and months, I've been saddened when conversations about possible approaches to climate change are turned into partisan politics. So if you hear partisan politics in my comments, then I have not communicated well. My goal is to acknowledge some difficult realities that I believe are well supported by credible and reliable data, and then talk about the role and call of disciples, both individually and collectively, to put their faith into action by making responsible choices today that can help shape a more just and sustainable future for the earth and its inhabitants. So with that introduction, let me dive in. As Susan said, I titled my session At the Crossroads, Igniting Faith and Justice in a Time of Change. I chose this because it carries several layers of meaning for me. The first part, At the Crossroads, suggests that we're at a critical moment of decision or transition. Susan talked about some key points where we're getting very close to that tipping point. So being at the crossroads implies that we are in a place where different paths converge, representing an opportunity to choose a direction that will shape the future. So it highlights the urgency of making intentional and impactful choices, especially in the face of significant societal and environmental changes. Igniting faith and justice suggests a call to action where faith becomes a catalyst for pursuing justice. Igniting conveys the idea of sparking energy, passion, and commitment. It emphasized that faith should not be passive, but should be lived out in pursuit of justice, particularly in addressing issues like climate change, inequality, and the well-being of creation. And lastly, in a time of change, indicates the context in which these decisions are taking place, a period marked by rapid, complex changes. It points to the challenges and uncertainties of our current moment in time, calling for responses that are rooted in both faith and a pursuit of justice to navigate these changes effectively. So overall, I believe we are in a moment of critical choices where the need for an active, faith-driven response to foster justice as we navigate times of significant change. I hope that our time together calls us both individually and collectively into considering actions and pursuing them in a way that will help us shape a just and sustainable future. As Susan mentioned, on 25 April 2023, the World Conference adopted Resolution 1325, a climate emergency, and I've got the webpage up there for you to see. In response, a month later, Community of Christ declared a climate emergency. At that time, in May of 23, we were joining 2,329 jurisdictions in 40 countries who had made climate emergency declarations. Of course, declaring a climate emergency is a significant spiritual and practical first step for Community of Christ. It helps us declare our enduring principles, such as the sacredness of creation and the worth of all persons. It signifies the church's dedication to addressing climate change as part of who we are. It identifies that working for climate change is actually well aligned with the teachings of Jesus, of our faith, and of our pursuit for the type of community and vision for the world that God has. But it is indeed only the first step. The collective action also led the church to the theme and material that we used this past summer for reunions, which was called Restoration Imperative to Heal the Earth. So that was sort of a second step to try to help people go deeper in understanding not only the challenges and the problems, but also to be open to hearing some of the possible solutions. So we have the first step of declaring an emergency, the second step of starting some education, but now it's really crucial that we complement those steps with the tangible actions to give them substance and impact. Declarations and learning without meaningful follow-through can risk being perceived as symbolic gestures rather than concrete commitments that affect positive change. So now, as a community, we must live into what it means to actively engage in our calling as Earth stewards, making responsible choices, not only for ourselves and families, but for all people and the Earth, which is our collective home. World church leaders are not trying to oversee or mandate meaningful actions at local and global levels in response to the climate emergency. Instead, we are trying to call each one and groups in various areas to be very discerning in listening to the leadings of the Spirit at local and global levels, to allow that Spirit to stir in the heart of faithful disciples who can then recognize the challenge and create avenues for responding that make sense in the context where they live. We are trying to support and magnify these grassroots efforts. That's why I'm here today, to emphasize how important the topics of this annual series is to us as individual disciples and as a faithful movement. Let me pause here to say that Susan used the word steward when she was talking about my bio, and I use the word steward, I just want to clarify that when I use the word steward, it does not mean domination, control, or entitlement to resources. Stewardship, as Community of Christ understands it, is not a position of privilege granted by God where one takes full advantage of what one has for personal comfort at the demise of others or the planet. Stewardship is a position of trust granted by God where one is responsible for serving as God's hands, feet, and wisdom in managing the gifts received for the benefit of all creation. As we are reminded in the 12th chapter of Luke, verse 48, from everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required. And from the one to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be demanded. The book, Choosing Generosity, Discovering Whole Life Stewardship, has an excellent quote that I want to share with you. Community of Christ believes that God created the heavens and the earth and all that is in them and called them good as an expression of divine love. Everything belongs to God and should be cherished and used justly according to divine purposes. God sees creation as a whole, without separation of spirit and element. God calls people of every generation to join with God as stewards in the loving care of creation. Individually and collectively, we have a responsibility to care for the earth, including natural resources and all creation. This is part of whole life stewardship. One of the 9 enduring principles of Community of Christ is the sacredness of creation. This enduring principle reminds us that we are continuing to affect creation and change is occurring. We are part of that change. You can't choose to not be. The fact that we live on this earth, that we breathe air, makes us part of the change. The question is, how will we make choices in how we live to minimize those impacts? Just as creation has the power to create or destroy, we have the power to affect creation in healthy ways and in damaging ways. So part of our whole life stewardship is to use our power for good. Our challenge, both as individuals and as a faith community, is to find and practice ways to embody stewardship in our daily lives that support, heal, and improve God's creation rather than dominate it. So that brings me back to our need as a faith community to have honest and sometimes difficult conversation about what it means to actively engage in our calling as earth stewards, making responsible choices for the good of all creation. And of course, like any conversation that is important and worth having, there are no easy answers. The climate emergency being faced by the world has multiple dimensions that I would conclude ultimately impact all aspects of life. Katharine Hayhoe is an atmospheric scientist and the spouse of a pastor. She has taken on the challenge to try and rally people of faith around the understanding of how the world is changing. With facts and compassion, she emphatically declares the challenge confronting humanity extends far beyond mere environmental concerns manifested in our changing climate. At the core of this climate crisis lies a multitude of pressing issues such as poverty, hunger, water scarcity, and disease. It's an economic quandary, a geopolitical puzzle, and a matter of national security. Now, perhaps you agree with Catherine's perspective, but maybe you do not. That is what makes this conversation so complex. What I have learned is that often when we face difficult conversations, we try to avoid them. It gets back to those lessons that we were all taught as children as to what makes appropriate topics for the dinner table or for Sunday morning. But disciples, by our very call to be engaged in God's world and trying to create the type of justice that God calls us to pursue, are required to engage in complex conversations, even when there are a variety of strongly held perspectives. We often become so focused on establishing and defending our own position and perspective that we miss the opportunity to find common ground. It is only when we find common ground that we can collectively make positive movement in responding to our call as Earth stewards to uphold the sacredness of creation and the worth of all persons. In my experience, we don't have to agree on all aspects of every topic to find common ground that can guide us in making decisions today that will create a better tomorrow. In fact, we should not get distracted by our disagreements. Let me say that one more time. We should not, or dare I say, we cannot get distracted by our disagreements, or we will miss our opportunity to make the choices we need to make today to create a more just and sustainable future. So as a community, we are well equipped for respectful dialogue and for having loving community, even with diverse perspectives. Applying the principles of faithful disagreement has helped us with this process. And recently, the Center for Innovation and Ministry through the seminary has been offering classes on participating in difficult conversations. So one of the ways that we can put our faith into action is by helping people understand that we don't have to steer clear from difficult conversations, and difficult conversations don't have to tear us apart. We must focus and build on the beliefs and perspectives that we hold in common. This allows us to gain momentum in working towards positive solutions to the climate emergency we are facing. This is especially important in Community of Christ as we prepare for the 2025 World Conference. 14 resolutions have been submitted for consideration. And for those of you who don't track World Conference facts, 14 is a lot of resolutions. And given that we have to do a lot of leadership changes at this conference, in addition to these resolutions, working on how we prioritize the resolutions is going to be very important because we undoubtedly will not get to all of them. These resolutions are currently posted on the World Conference page at seaofchrist.org. You see kind of what it looks like there. From now until the end of 2024, mission centers around the world will be providing input for prioritizing the legislative agenda. There will be certainly, I just know that there is not going to be adequate time for us to consider all 14 of these resolutions. And so the priority input from the body is critically important. Of these 14, 3 of them are focused on affirmations and actions related to climate change. I'm not going to discuss those 3 climate change resolutions since there will be other opportunities to explore these together. I know, for instance, the World Church is going to be sponsoring online events to explore each resolution. What I want to uphold is the importance of being open to the leading of the Spirit as you participate in prioritizing the legislative agenda for the 2025 World Conference. This is one way of using your prophetic voice, our prophetic voice as a people to discern together what matters most for our time during World Conference next June. Our deliberations at World Conference will be an important opportunity for us to look for places of common ground where we can push forward ideas and actions with the full support of the worldwide church. So that's like a lot of information. So I'm going to pause here and see if you have any like questions or reactions. And Dean, I think you're going to take the lead on that.
Yes, I am. And so I'm looking for questions in the chat. I noticed somebody asked for a link to the document, the Faithful Disagreement document, and I think someone just put a link in. So you have an answer to that question. Are there other questions that people want to put in the chat to raise? And while we're waiting for that, Stacy, I want to pose a question to you. Church leadership's role, you indicated, is not to oversee or mandate actions, but really recommending spiritual discernment to stir the hearts of the people and particularly those who make decisions to action. But I think one of the things we've seen is that governments have a pattern of declaring lofty goals and then not following through to action. So, what do you see as our community's role in addressing that challenge?
Yeah, Dean, that's very helpful. What what World Church leaders try to do is when there are different actions or things happening by governments, and there's the opportunity to advocate for. We are constantly going through our World Conference resolutions, and if there's something bubbling up, we usually rely very heavily on groups that we're part of, like the National Council of Churches or Churches for Middle East Peace, or people writing into us and giving us notification of something that's happening. If we have a World Conference resolution or something that has been agreed to by the body that speaks to the particular issue, then we feel like we can legitimately put the community of Christ's name on it on behalf of the worldwide church, because there has been an action by the people to support that. So when you hear that, like, we signed a letter or we sent a letter on a particular topic, those are always, we have kind of the logic backing of why we believe we could speak on behalf of the church. If there is a topic that individual leaders have a personal perspective on, but there is not an action by the worldwide church, we give individual leaders, obviously our people and disciples, and so they can act and add their names on a personal level. So that's usually how we try to distinguish. With the climate emergency and some of the proclamations in there, I think there are some elements of accountability. Our biggest struggle is in recognizing when and where we have opportunities to speak, and that's where teams such as the Peace and Justice team and others can help us recognize when those opportunities arise. And then we try to use social media to then make people aware, but again, we always need to have something that says that the church as a whole is backing this.
Thank you. We have a question from Dakota Mathis, which has the issue of industrialized food production come into the equation in this movement regarding solutions to climate change. And I think by industrial food production, I think we're talking about those elements of food production that do create a challenge in terms of methane production and soil degradation and so on. And if not, the questioner has said, has anyone read or seen the position paper in the Journal of Ecological Society from 2021? That's not a journal I'm familiar with, but be interested in hearing more about it. So do you know, Stacy, are you familiar with that particular statement?
I am not familiar with that particular journal. I'm I've read so many materials this summer because we were teaching different things. I know that in some of the reunions that I was at, I was in the Midwest. I was in kind of the heart of farming communities. And so we had several conversations about what could be done. How do you approach that? How do you transition that? How do we advocate the government to help with some of those transitions? So those conversations were clearly occurring in some of the Midwestern reunions that I attended this summer. But there, as you can imagine, were a lot of perspectives, but I think people were genuinely open and looking for what really was the best way forward. And I was encouraged by people's responses.
Mhm. And Michael DeMol has asked Dakota if Dakota would put in the chat a link to that issue of the Journal of the Ecological Society. So, Dakota, if you're able to do that, that would be greatly appreciated. I'm not seeing other questions. And so I think, Stacy, we can move on to your next part.
All right, good. Oh, and I see that Lori, and that's what I thought. And then I hedged Lori because I panicked and thought I might not remember. But she was just saying that the 3 climate-related resolutions will be reviewed on October 20th. So thank you, Lori. I was like, oh, I should have looked up that date and I forgot. So thank you. All right, well, let's keep going. Susan talked about exercising prophetic courage. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like from my perspective. The prophetic part, of course, is about being open to listen to different perspectives and to collectively seek how we can best align our hearts, minds, and souls with God's purposes on and for the earth. My experience is that prophetic role is really a team sport, meaning we do it better when we do it together because we all have blinders. And it's when we work together that we can work around our own blinders and biases. The courage, of course, comes when we are willing to make changes as needed to commit our resources of time, talents, treasures, and testimony or advocacy to pursue pathways from where we are to where we need to be without hesitation. We know that change is necessary and that each one of us is going to have to participate in that change. And we're going to have to collectively participate that. We have a list on the church's website about some of the actions that we have tried to take at international headquarters to make better choices about products we use and energy that we purchase and cars that are driven, paid for through worldwide mission ties. And we have more work to do in that area. It takes boldness and strength to speak and act according to one's deeply held values and convictions, but it takes even more courage to listen to the perspectives of others and remain open to where God is leading us to respond in situations of injustice and wrongdoings. None of us like admitting that we're wrong, and sometimes changing our perspective can be really hard, but also very necessary. I don't think any of us has all the answers. At least I know I don't have all the answers to climate change, but I have been so encouraged as we have been really exploring the topic this summer through various reunions and groups at the number of people who are interested and who are seeking information and who are open to changing their own habits and behaviors and the habits and behaviors of their families and their congregations. So all of that to me points to the positive impact we can have when we are willing to challenge the status quo, exercising our prophetic courage, when we're willing to advocate for the marginalized communities and pursue transformative change, even when it may be difficult or unpopular. It is also a readiness to challenge our own tightly held perspectives and understandings when the Spirit is trying to guide us in new ways. Jesus invited disciples to pick up their cross and follow him. That to me implies that discipleship was never intended to be an easy task. The good news is, I believe it is the work of prophetic people. Think about the example of the prophets in the scriptures. Their first step was to honestly assess their current context and why it was not aligned with God's purposes. Against all odds and often with no support, they had to speak hard truths to their peers and the power brokers of their day. Then they had to try and help people imagine how they might change their ways to create a different future more aligned with God's vision. They had to guide people, often non-cooperative people, toward an alternative future. This seems like exactly the type of blessings we need to be bringing into the world today related to the climate emergency and other injustices that are woven together with climate emergency. I know that even in the last, several years, the last decade, I can look back at my own journey, my husband and I, and we were born in the Midwest. We're like meat and potato eaters, all these choices. Um, his dad was an auto mechanic, so fast cars, all these things. You get the picture. And we are not perfect in the choices that we're making, but we have been making changes and we are learning and we are adjusting our own choices. And that's part of what all of this is about, is being open to that continuous learning together and being open to make changes. So Susan talked about just transition. As reported by the United Nations, climate change is now affecting every country on every continent. It is disrupting national economies and affecting lives, costing people, communities, and countries dearly today and into the future. People are experiencing the significant impacts of climate change, which include changing weather patterns, rising sea level, and more extreme weather events. This summer, Apostle Catherine Mombwe, she and I were talking midsummer, and they were going through major periods without electricity because of drought that was atypical for this time of year. I had the opportunity in the late spring to travel to French Polynesia, a country that is island-based, and heard stories of reduced sizes of islands as water levels get higher and higher. So the greenhouse gas emissions from human activities are driving climate change and continue to rise. They are now at their highest levels in history. And so without action, the world's average surface temperature is projected to rise significantly over the 21st century. And of course, as is often the case, the poorest and most vulnerable people will be the ones affected the most. Again, this is compelling for us as disciples when we know that Jesus sent us to work for the poor in the world. So Community of Christ is called to stand in solidarity with the poorest and most vulnerable. It is a restoration imperative that we are in the forefront of working for climate justice as part of our faithfully living Christ's mission, which of course includes abolishing poverty, ending suffering, and pursuing peace on and for the earth. As we face decisions on what is needed and how we get involved, the question will continue to come up as to what needs are most important and how do we transition from where we are to where we need to be in a way that reflects our identity, mission, message, and beliefs as a people. So that brings us to the concept of just transition. In general, a just transition refers to a framework for addressing the climate emergency that seeks to shift from fossil fuels to sustainable energy sources in a way that is fair and equitable for all communities, especially those most affected by the transition. As described by the European Bank for Transition and Development, this concept emphasizes the importance of ensuring that the social, economic, and environmental impacts of transitioning to a low-carbon economy are managed in a way that protects the rights and livelihoods of workers, communities, and marginalized groups. So how do you balance everyone's needs and make choices that are just and equitable? That, of course, is one of the many challenges before us. And fortunately, there are a lot of really smart people in the world working on solutions. For us, prayer, education, respectful dialogue, seeking expert advice are just some of the ways we can work to ensure that our actions toward a just transition are truly equitable and helping, especially when there might be conflicting needs and priorities between communities. That's why it's so important. Dean kind of commented about my statement about that church leaders don't want to mandate in a downward directed way what needs to happen on the ground in the various places in the world, because we can't possibly have the expertise or the knowledge as to what would be most effective in different places. So our role is as encouragers and promoters and in helping give voice to those who are on the ground trying to find solutions. I don't know if there are any Star Trek fans online, but my husband and I are huge Star Trek fans, and it kind of reminds me of Spock's pronouncement in the second Star Trek movie, Wrath of Khan. When faced with an impossible situation, Spock declares that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. So Spock dies in the second movie, and he dies saving, pretty much the universe. Now, in the third movie, Star Trek has its own resurrection story. It's called The Search for Spock, and turns out that Spock's body is shipped off to a newly creating planet. And so Captain Kirk wants to go and find him. And Captain Kirk flips Spock's logic upside down by stating the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many. So he's willing to put at risk others so that they can go in search of Spock. So how can both be true? For me, both can be true because we are all interconnected with each other and with the rest of creation. We must look at the whole of creation as a system. Susan told you that I have an engineering background. So system engineers are all about how everything works together and how you can't just tweak one part of the system without counting on it having an impact someplace else. This is often called the butterfly effect. Excuse me, I couldn't say that. The butterfly effect, which rests on the notion that the world is deeply interconnected, such that one small occurrence can influence a much larger complex system. This idea is not really new. In the Hebrew scriptures, the prophet Jeremiah challenged those who had been taken captive to care for the welfare of the city and their captors, because for in its welfare, you will find your welfare. This biblical foundation calls us to prioritize the needs of others alongside our own, recognizing that our well-being is interconnected with the well-being of our communities and the world. We hear a similar reminder from the modern day prophet, Martin Luther King Jr. In his 1963 letter from a Birmingham jail, he wrote, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And in 2007, the prophetic people of Community of Christ adopted Section 163 into our Doctrine and Covenants with two important reminders about our interconnectedness with other people and creation. Let me read paragraph A and B. God, the eternal creator, weeps for the poor, displaced, mistreated, and diseased of the world because of their unnecessary suffering. Such conditions are not God's will. Open your ears to hear the pleading of mothers and fathers in all nations who desperately seek a future of hope for their children. Do not turn away from them, for in their welfare resides your welfare. The earth, lovingly created as an environment for life to flourish, shudders in distress because creation's natural and living systems are becoming exhausted from carrying the burden of human greed and conflict. Humankind must awaken from its illusion of independence and unrestrained consumption without lasting consequences. Through the years, our African brothers and sisters have shared about the concept of Ubuntu. I've heard Bunda talk about this on numerous occasions. It's another way to understand this network of mutuality we are exploring. Ubuntu is a term from the Nguni Bantu languages of South Africa, including Zulu. Some of you may remember from campfire songs, Zulu Warrior. So Zulu warriors are a real thing in Africa, and it is in fact a language. Ubuntu embodies the philosophy of shared humanity and interconnectedness, emphasizing that a person's humanity is deeply connected to the humanity of others. Ubuntu often is translated as I am because we are. I am because we are. It underscores the belief that our humanity is tied to the well-being of others, just like we were told in Jeremiah, just as identified by Martin Luther King Jr., and just as we read in the Doctrine and Covenants. According to Nelson Mandela, the late president of South Africa, Ubuntu means people should not look out only for themselves. Rather, the accompanying questions to their motives should be, am I going to do this to enable the community around me to improve? Am I going to do this to enable the community around me to improve? Will my goals and motives help create an economically and environmentally sustainable future in my village? It is easy to acknowledge this network of mutuality until this worldview requires us to sacrifice something for the benefit of others. In Community of Christ, we are called to imitate God's love and generosity. This sacrificial nature of God's love and generosity are demonstrated in the most quoted scripture in the New Testament, John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he gave his only son. I use the term sacrificial intentionally because after having children, I realized that I could imagine sacrificing myself if I thought I could save the world or even a portion of it, but I was not sure I could sacrifice one of my children. Now that I've had grandchildren, I'm even more overwhelmed by the unconditional, unlimited, sacrificial nature of God's love and generosity. And yet, as Susan said in my bio, I now recognize as I learn more and more about the choices we are making and need to make to help heal the earth, how important every choice we make every day is to the health and welfare of my grandchildren and your grandchildren and all children. I'm aware that the choices and actions that we are making are truly impactful, and that we can't just numbly go through our days doing what we've always done, because it is clear that is not getting us where God needs us to go. We are called and challenged to imitate God's love and generosity through sacrifice for the greater good, not just for today, but for future generations as well. Practically, this means getting out of our comfort zone, being willing to be inconvenienced at times, learning to eat new foods, learning to drive new kinds of cars, learning to walk more, to ride bikes, whatever those choices are that we need to be making. We need to use our voice and our vote to advocate for and support policies that ensure fair resource allocation, supporting communities that rely on fossil fuels, and promoting sustainable practices. It involves both individual actions and collective efforts within our congregations and wider communities. The more consumers choose things that are good for the earth, the cheaper those items will become and the more available they will be to all. The whole world can't stop using fossil fuels immediately, but we must be actively engaged in that transition. One example might be prioritizing resources for the poor. This might involve redirecting funds or resources to support those who are most affected by climate change and environmental degradation. Another example might be supporting communities dependent on fossil fuels, such as the ones Susan talked about, farmers, truckers, or villages in developing countries. Providing assistance and advocating for fair transition policies ensures that these communities are not left behind as we move toward greener energy sources. And another example might be making sure that those whose livelihoods depend on fossil fuels are given opportunities to retrain and adapt their skills to other employment opportunities. The list goes on and on. I don't have like all of those answers or all of those possibilities. But as you look at all of the faces on this group and think of your sphere of influences and the people that you're connected with, I believe that if we are all actively engaged and if we think about every decision we make each day, that we can in fact start to impact that transition. So I think this is another good stopping point, Dean. I feel like there's some things in the chat.
Right. So let me just mention a statement from Susan Oxley. One of the ideas embedded in the concept of a just transition is the idea of consulting with those who are most impacted and listening to their needs and solutions as an important part of moving forward. And this stands in opposition to our tendency to take charge and tell folks what must be done in their own local context as if we know best. As one quote says, nothing about us without us. And I think that aligns with your notion of the World Church encouraging, but using a process that engages the hearts of all. I want to mention also that Bruce Nelson's mentioned he has some expertise in a couple of areas. And Bruce, look for someone reaching out in the near future to see whether you might contribute to one of our future webinars. And again, let me remind people that you're welcome to put any questions you have that prompted by Stacy's comments into the chat. Having not seen others, I'm going to take the prerogative of posing one as well. So, Stacy, the pace at which climate tipping points are approaching may outpace our church processes for engaging in consensus seeking and legislative action. How do you see us adapting our processes to deal with this misalignment in the pace of things?
Dean, you ask hard questions.
Sorry.
No, I'm just teasing. Well, I think that's one of the advantages of decentralization. In the Way Forward messages, President Veazey talked about the increased need for decentralization. So, what we cannot maybe do as a worldwide church, I think we can maybe make strides in more like, in mission center or in, geographic areas. Um, even like, for instance, in the USA, we've had a lot of conversations. Is there a place where, a USA national conference should convene periodically to have, both from an education standpoint, but also from a legislative standpoint to generate actions that can be pursued, inside of the United States in advocating and lobbying and those types of actions. One of the resolutions that's coming to the World Conference is a resolution from Canada East asking for a bylaws review committee. So one way to streamline and maybe simplify some of our legislative processes would be to review and adopt new bylaws. So I would encourage people to give serious consideration to that resolution. Again, a lot of prioritization that needs to take place so that we know that we're focusing on what's important, but it will be very interested, from a leadership standpoint to see what people are thinking about the church's need to streamline. We always have that tension between wanting to be highly collaborative and consensus building, and yet collaboration and consensus building slows down taking actions. The good news is that oftentimes when you take an action, you can sometimes gain faster momentum because you have more agreement moving forward. So I think it's not giving up that collaboration or consensus building, but it is maybe intensifying those opportunities to work together, and then maybe increasing those options or locations where decisions can be made and we can push forward. But you're right. I mean, the timeline that we are on, from a Community of Christ standpoint, if we had Ron here, he would be reminding us that we've got kind of a 5-year window related to finances and where we need to have some solutions in place for increasing income to maintain the level of ministries and services. And some of our climate stuff is on that same, 5-year pathway. So that scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants about the time for hesitation is past could never be truer than it is today on a whole host of topics.
I'm looking for questions here. I'm seeing some comments. And so I'll just recommend to people that they take a look at the comments that are in there, and I won't bother to read them right now. But I have another question that's a follow-up to your comments about sacrifice. Some will argue that standing with the poor and those most affected by climate change requires us to dial down our own lifestyles significantly to consume much less. What's the world church's role, particularly in this country, the United States, North America, the developed world in the Northern Hemisphere? What's the world church's role in encouraging this cultural adjustment?
So that is actually at the very heart of who we are as a people, and that's why I didn't want to completely steer away from using the term stewardship in my comments. I know stewardship can get very misconstrued. Well, so can Christianity. I mean, oh my goodness. And so personally, we have to reclaim what is Christ's message. We have to reclaim what does it mean to be good stewards. But good stewards is all about identifying what is enough and, what are your real needs. And it's about, I mean, it's not about like giving up everything and participating in abject poverty, but it is that you can make different choices, which then creates an abundance that allows you to share with others. There's just a million scriptures about enough and to spare. My favorite comment, my dad and I talk about this all the time because, my dad loves to read like politics stuff. And so, we have these like great debates, and he loves me. And so you can talk like really honestly, and you don't have to choose your words carefully. And so I'm always saying to him, like, Dad, the best economists in the world would tell us there is enough available in the world. The issue is not about having enough food or enough energy. It's about distribution and about how we distribute it and about how we make it available. And that's, again, the role of faith. Our job is to help people not only love their neighbor, but love their enemy. And if we can start to have that kind of love for humanity, that will change how we behave. Sorry, I'm breaking into a sermon, Dean. Never give
No,
a
no,
preacher a
no.
mic.
That's why you're here. Um, um, I've had a couple of questions I found here. Paul Bethel is asking, how might we go about getting a USA conference initiated to urge specific actions by the church in the US? I think this is in relation to the notion of, we need to lower our consumption levels in this particular part of the world. So how would we
Yeah,
go about setting up a conference of that sort?
yeah. So one is to make your interest about that known to your mission center presence and to your field apostles, world church leaders. We're kind of in a period of transition right now as new leaders are being named. We have designates. We're, trying to figure out what things are going to look like so that we're really ready to move coming out in, 2025. And so making those desires known is really important so that leaders can bring those kind of ideas to the table. Additionally, you might want to consider that resolution about the bylaws study. Maybe it's important to you that we shift our bylaws, that we create more requirements or needs for those national discussions. So that would certainly be another way to make your voice known about that.
Right. And Bobby Price, I note your comment also about having some expertise that you could maybe contribute to our future webinars. And Michael DeMall reminds us that something in the Doctrine and Covenants talks about unnecessary wants and reducing them. So I think with this, at this point, I'm going to let you move into your next section.
All right. Well, I am moving to wrap up, so everyone shouldn't panic too much. But there's just so many things we can talk about, and I'm so grateful for the comments and questions. So the need for climate justice is for me, it is, it's perplexing. It's hard. And yet it's one of the most urgent matters of our time. The United Nations reported that affordable, scalable solutions are now available to enable countries to leapfrog to cleaner, more resilient economies. The pace of change is quickening as more people are turning to renewable energy and a range of other measures that will reduce emissions and increase adaptation efforts. But climate change is a global challenge that does not respect national borders. So emissions anywhere affect people everywhere. It is an issue that requires solutions that need to be coordinated at the international level, and it requires international cooperation to help developing countries move toward a low carbon economy. Well, and I'm going to go off script here a little bit and say, we have to be able to work together as a global community. And right now, it doesn't take much diving into the headlines to see how much we are not working together as a global community. So again, that need for that prophetic voice of justice, of nonviolent actions to seek changes and not, war and all these things that are happening. We could easily throw up our hands and say, this is way above my pay grade. There is nothing I can do. I'm just going to press on and live my life. But if we do that, that would be a huge mistake, and we would be turning our back on an urgent call. I think Community of Christ is well positioned to help transform hearts and focus people on an integrated approach to life and discipleship. We may be small, but we are mighty. In 2000, Community of Christ adopted Doctrine and Covenants, Section 161, and we were reminded about the nature of transformation. Understand that the road to transformation travels both inward and outward. The road to transformation is the path of the disciple. The inward focus is about transforming our own hearts through spiritual, emotional, and physical preparation. Spiritual preparation is about staying connected with God, cultivating faith, which leads to resilience. Staying focused on Christ's mission and God's vision for the world gives us hope. Through prayer and scripture study, spiritual practices, worship, we're reminded of God's love and generosity. We experience this through our love for each other, and it helps us grow in our ability to imitate God's love and generosity. Emotional preparation is about strengthening our community, building our network of families, friends, and partners. It's about seeing the other as neighbor. As our network grows, we can find things we have in common, so our actions are no longer just individual actions, but can grow into community actions. That leads to another African term we've learned. Harambe is a term from Swahili, a Bantu language spoken in many countries in East Africa, including Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The word means all pulled together and is often used to signify collective effort and community collaboration. Both our spiritual and our emotional preparation equip us to navigate times of anxiety and fear about the future. Through open conversations and spiritual guidance, we can find peace and purpose. Together, we gain the courage to begin to imagine a future that is better because of the choices we will have courage to make. So this leads to physical preparation, where we can work together implementing practical steps towards sustainability in a just and equitable way. This includes adopting sustainable practices in our daily lives, such as reducing waste, conserving energy, supporting local sustainable agriculture. It also involves integrating all aspects of our lives, including personal, professional, civic, and discipleship, such that our choices are guided by our faithful response to what we discern through our spiritual preparation. So this moves us into the outward focus, where our congregations, mission centers, and other faith groups can be a catalyst for helping people see the connection between faithful discipleship and working for climate justice. The church can help create opportunities for spiritual, emotional, and physical preparation for others. The church can encourage the kind of transformation that leads to changed hearts focused on God's will for creation. We can be an alternative voice that gets back to what Jesus was all about. I've already mentioned other paragraphs from section 163 in the Community of Christ Doctrine and Covenants, but I need to point out paragraph 4C as well. It says, let the educational and community development endeavors of the church equip people of all ages to carry the ethics of Christ's peace into all arenas of life. Prepare new generations of disciples to bring fresh vision to bear on the perplexing problems of poverty, disease, war, and environmental deterioration. Their contribution will be multiplied if their hearts are focused on God's will for creation. This prophetic counsel was shared 17 years ago. I mean, that's a long time. And we are just now, I think, beginning to awaken to its call. I realize that we are a small faith movement, but we can be the salt and the yeast that helps bring about change. And we are a worldwide movement, so we can learn from each other and we can help each other. We stand at the crossroads of what is and what can be. And we get to choose what we will do next. For better or for worse, we believe that God has given us our agency. And so God is patiently encouraging us to be who God created us to be. Making specific choices about what faithful step to take next requires contextualization. Each of us needs to get engaged in what is possible to work towards climate justice in the context where we live and serve. I recently started reading a book by Ayanya Elizabeth Johnson titled, "What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures." The title caught my attention because my educational background in my PhD work was about positive organizational science. Positive organization science encourages people to approach situations with hope, seeing the positive possibilities as opposed to being overcome by the fear of the negative possibilities. As we go deeper in our own exploration of who we need to be and how we need to respond to the climate emergency, the news could truly be overwhelming. We could become frozen and immobilized by fear. But our hope for the future resides in our opportunity and responsibility to make faithful, responsible choices for the benefit of all creation. One decision at a time, one change at a time. When you go to the grocery store, when you go to the gas station, when you buy a new car, when you're looking for new clothing, when you're choosing to buy something that maybe you don't need. All of those moments are little moments that become big moments if we try to apply our discipleship in each one. And just imagine what the future might look like if we truly embrace the sacredness of creation and work with others to pursue climate justice. Let's step out in faith, motivated by imagining what if we get it right. We can't focus on what if we get it wrong. The hope comes from what if we get it right. So how might each of us choose our next faithful steps? I want to just wrap up with 7 questions for your prayerful consideration, one for each day of the week, as you ponder the actions you can take individually and in partnership with others. So I've provided an overview of why it's imperative for people of faith to get involved, because sometimes we hear climate justice is a political issue. Why is the church talking about this? But I hope you're understanding it's a faith issue. So with that challenge, what are specific practical steps that you can incorporate into our daily lives that we as individuals, congregations, or the church can take right now to prepare spiritually, emotionally, and physically for the climate emergency? Second, it's really important that we hear diverse voices and perspectives. How can we connect with our worldwide community to hear the perspectives and testimonies of those directly impacted by climate change, especially vulnerable communities, to deepen our understanding of the global nature of this issue and how we might most appropriately seek climate justice for all? World Conference will be a great opportunity for that, so I hope lots of you will choose to come there. 3, I shared a perspective from Catherine Hayhoe about intersectionality. In what ways can our climate action also contribute to broader systemic change for a just and equitable future in a way aligned with Community of Christ's enduring principles, because of how climate change intersects with other forms of injustice, such as racial, gender, and economic equalities? So, you can work for climate justice and for a whole lot of other injustice issues all at the same time. Number 4, one way to multiply our efforts is through partnerships, community engagement, and advocacy. How can our congregations and faith communities become more actively engaged in climate justice advocacy at the local level, but also at the national level? And we've talked a little bit about that today, including partnerships or community events that will strengthen our collective efforts. Number 5, we talked a little bit about whole life stewardship and how it includes economic justice. So how might people of faith contribute to economic solutions like promoting green job training or supporting sustainable economic initiatives in vulnerable communities and supporting a just transition for workers dependent on fossil fuels? How might we simply make the choice of living with a little bit less so we can share a little bit more? Number 6, we are a people who find hope through stories. How can we as a church help share stories about successful climate justice initiatives or transitions that motivate and encourage our communities to have hope and believe that meaningful change is possible? And number 7, change always begins with ourselves. What personal commitments can each of us make today to engage in deeper learning about climate justice, take specific actions, and get involved in local initiatives? I know all of you on this webinar have made that commitment simply by being here. So these are just some starter questions as you continue to explore and look for ways to act. So Dean, before I say my total wrap up, let's just do another quick check-in.
Sure. Lori posted a comment reminding us that system wisdom always includes the entire natural world in our account of this vast web of independent relationships. So not forgetting Earth's other than human creatures, and recognizing the interwoven, interactive, and sustaining life support systems without which life cannot flourish. I'm having a little trouble keeping pace with the comments, but there's a question about perhaps planning a series of Herald articles that address how might we go about making a difference in the climate emergency as a community, and ways to positively impact climate justice. And Mike Bott suggests maybe you could call the series Crossroads. And it strikes me that the 7 questions you posed might be another way of framing a series in the Herald. And I suspect there are people on this webinar who'd be happy to help out with that. Looking forward here, there are lots of statements of appreciation, Stacy, for your taking the time to be with this group today and bring forward these concerns and these concepts. There's a request, Rod, for a copy of the questions or a transcript of the whole presentation. I don't know, maybe you want to preserve that, Stacy, for a Herald article as well. I don't know, but is it okay if we share your transcript with those who attended today, or to put it on the website?
Yeah, Susan has it and Paul has it. So it has not been edited, so it might be a little rough, but you're happy. If it helps anybody, for sure, you're free to have it and use it.
Great. Any other questions that people might have? I think we've maybe got another 3 or 4 minutes if people have questions they want to pose, and I'm still scanning through the chat. And Bruce Nelson wants to know if I'm related to Les and Lydia White. Yes, Bruce, my grandparents. Thanks, Dakota, for the links to the Journal of the Ecological Society. Go vegan was the added comment there.
We have one comment. Gus Speth, the co-founder of the Natural Resources Defense Council, said that the 3 major environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. Given that, whose refusal to act is more problematic in the struggle for sustainability? Spiritual leaders or political leaders?
That was a question, Stacy. You want to take a shot at answering it, or do you want to stick with your notion of staying away from political comments?
Well, I mean, we all have responsibility. I think that's the nature of community. So political leaders have responsibility. We have responsibility as civic participants in the various nations where we live to actively engage and to hold our political leaders accountable and responsible. But we're also a church that believes in the accountability of each other. And so you all should be holding religious leaders equally accountable and responsible. And if we're not doing what we need to do to uphold that connectedness and that love for others, if we are creating divisiveness, if we are pulling things apart, then religious leaders should be held accountable for that.
Dakota, you've raised your hand. Do you want to unmute yourself and make your comment or question?
Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure if I could. I just wanted to say real quick, I entered that question, but it was a comment above it. I was just sharing it because something that Stacy shared, talking about spiritual leaders taking initiative as well, or something about it's something reminded me that maybe some people think it's always a political issue. That's what it was. And I was posed that question by the writer of the article I referenced, and in another class, and I just was sharing that because I thought it was great, and I'm so proud of our movement and our church that we are taking climate change seriously. And just thank you for everything today. Everyone's wonderful.
And thank you, Dakota, for your participation, your comments. And Paul, I'm going to let you pose your question as a way of transitioning to your closing process for this session.
Oh,
You're,
well,
you're-
I think Stacy still has her own closing
sorry.
comments, but
Okay,
my,
but also then I'll state your question. Your concern, I think, has to do with some people in our movement still claim that climate change is not a valid topic for the church. So how do we convince more people it is a faith thing, a legitimate topic for a faith community, I guess would be the way to ask.
Yeah, I that is definitely still a problem. We continue to get letters in the presidency's office when we write about these topics in the Herald or in the reunion material. I think all we can continue to do is just uphold the information like we've been talking about today, and advocate for the faithful response of disciples, and how that has always been part of our responsibility is to care for the earth and each other. So, there's some things that all you can do is just keep restating the obvious, I think. So with that, you want me to go ahead and wrap up, Dean? I just have a couple closing statements.
Absolutely.
First of all, I want to just thank everyone again for being here and for being so engaged. I keep looking through all of your questions, or not questions, your squares, and you've all remained so attentive. So thank you. As we leave this webinar, I hope that you will carry the spirit of prophetic courage with you. I hope that we can each remain committed to fostering a just transition that honors our faith, our communities, and our planet, that we can share what we've learned here or the conversations that we've had here with others in our congregations and in our families, because it's only as we continue to have conversations that attitudes and perspectives change. Like I said in the beginning, I do believe from everything I have read and studied that we are in a moment of critical choices, and that we need to be active and faith-driven in our responses to foster justice. I also believe that God will continue to guide us as we navigate these times of significant change. So I hope you feel like you got a good return on your investment of time. and that it's helped make the connection between faith and the gospel imperative to individually and collectively engage in the kind of actions that we've been talking about. And I hope that as you move in tomorrow, that you'll remember that the choices that you are making today and tomorrow have a direct impact on not only our future, but generations to come. But I continue to draw hope and courage and strength from being in this journey with all of you. And so I just want to thank you for your commitment to this topic. And I want to remind you, what if we get it right?
Well, I want to thank Stacy for taking time to join us today. We can all imagine how long your to-do list is, so we're really grateful that you could share with us today, and even that you had to jog to the temple in order to do it. But at least for myself, your words are very encouraging, and I think that in itself can give us hope. So again, thank you. Our next webinar, October 20th, we'll be taking a look at the 3 proposed World Conference resolutions that respond to the climate emergency that's referenced in World Conference Resolution 1325. So we'll hear some of the reasoning and the impetus from the submitting groups on how and why these resolutions came about. One will be a resolution submitted by the World Church Standing Human Rights Team, proposed resolution G11 titled Climate Change Emergency Call to Action. It will be presented by Jim Ash, who is a member of the Church's Standing Human Rights Team. Submitted by the Standing World Church Earth Stewardship Team, proposed resolution G10 titled Earth Stewardship Affirmation. That will be presented by Rick Bunch, who is the team lead of the Standing Earth Stewardship Team. And then finally, submitted by the Greater Pacific Northwest Mission Center, drafted by the Climate Justice Team, proposed resolution G5 titled Climate Emergency Fossil Fuel Reduction, and that will be presented by myself, Paul Bethel, as a member of the Climate Justice Team. So again, thank everyone for joining us today, and again, thanks to President Cram. We urge everyone to go out and listen to a tree, or perhaps say thank you to a bumblebee. And as a reminder that we record our webinars, so if any of you wish to share Stacy's address today with others in your congregation, this resource will be available on our website. And a quick save the date, our November webinar is November 24th, titled Toward a Just Transition, Earth Approaching Tipping Points. So we hope you can join us next month to explore these 3 climate-related World Conference resolution proposals. And with that, you are free to move about the cabin.